Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight to this event, The American Awakening. Let me also thank our audience who is live streaming this event tonight. We're glad that you have joined us as well. This event is sponsored by Liberty Fund and the RealClear Foundation. I'm Richard Reinsch. I'm the editor of Law and Liberty, an online journal that is published by Liberty Fund. And we're glad that you're here. We had the idea for this event in thinking about identity politics, critical race theory, anti-racism, all of it together. And in my work editing the Journal of Law and Liberty, I've confronted these issues extensively. And Josh Mitchell's book, American Awakening, is one of the best ways, I think, of wrestling with these issues and grappling with them. And so we wanted to put together an event where we could let him talk and have a question and answer period with him and understand more about this, the challenge of identity politics. As I mentioned, I'm the editor of Law and Liberty. Liberty Fund, our publisher, has a 60-year history of Socratic education conferences. We've done thousands of them. We've published hundreds of books. And in the last 2 decades of web publishing, I'm a leader in that, of trying to build and foster a society of free and responsible persons. We're based out of Indianapolis. Our founder, Pierre Goodrich, very much believed in reading significant texts and works and discussing them with others. And that's what we want to do tonight with this book, American Awakening, by Josh Mitchell. So I'm glad that all of you could join us. I'm going to introduce David DeRozier, the president of RealClear Foundation, the other sponsor of this event, and he is going to introduce our speaker, Joshua Mitchell, and thank you so much.
As Richard mentioned, I'm David DeRozier. I'm the publisher of RealClearPolitics and the president of the RealClear Foundation. And I'm also a long-term beneficiary of the Liberty Fund's work and a long-term beneficiary of Josh's writing. So just a word about either. We're here today, in the most beautiful place. And I apologize for our live stream public who cannot see any of the beauty that's behind me or outside in these grounds, but Harlan Crow has built something very beautiful here. Much like Pierre Goodrich, here was a person that actually was moved by something beautiful. Harlan, I think, like Pierre, just loves the truth, veritas, and the idea and ideals of America. And for anybody who has not been ever to Old Parkland, you have to come here. It's so beautiful and what he's built. I think there's not a person who works in a Scottish foundry in Scotland who's not under full employment making this place as beautiful as it is today. So thank you, Harlan. I know there's a golf tournament outside and you can't be here for this, but thank you for creating this. And in the same way with Pierre, it's like, here's a guy who loved great books, would meet the greatest people in the world, and he met them by reading. And what did he want to do with his money? He wanted to put it in the service of keeping the greatest books alive and in print, and to create conversations about them. I think that's why we're here today, right? Because, both Richard and I have a friend who happened to write a great book, right? And he's here today to talk about it, that great book. And I would just say to kind of, to give Josh, his background, because the difference between a philosopher and a non-philosopher is that a philosopher is modest, and I'm not a philosopher. So let me tell you something about Josh. I think we're living in a time where the basic idea of our regime is up for grabs, right? So we all grew up learning about a phrase, e pluribus unum, right? Well, the unum matters. And I think what makes Josh's book very important is he shows how this new unum that's being put up doesn't work. It cannot hold together the pluribus, right? So I really think that unless Josh wins, right, we lose, right? That unless we get back to the America of the Declaration of Independence, we lose. And I think the beauty about what Josh can do is he can explain why, right? But I do think that if Josh doesn't win, there's something very serious. If you bend your knee to an idea that actually doesn't seem right to you in your bones, but you do anyways, we're going to change our country. And one of the things I like about Josh and the book that he has is he has the mind to defend what's in our marrow. He knows why this country is good and why this idea is bad. And I couldn't think of a better place or a better person to bring to this place than Josh Mitchell to talk about his book. And I thank the Liberty Fund, our partners, for the opportunity of bringing him to you. Thank you. Also, I should mention that Josh is because a philosopher. They're spending their times talking to students. He's also attached to a think tank that I think very highly of, called the Claremont Institute, and he's doing some work with him, and I think you should find out about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, David. Good evening, everybody. The American regime, threatened throughout much of the 20th century by communism abroad and hobbled at home by progressivism, now faces a greater challenge, its gravest, I think, since 1865. The combined kinetic force of the greatest military in the history of the world can't defend against its onslaught. The nature of this threat is not material, it's spiritual. It's domestic rather than foreign. One portion of America is captivated by its promise of a spiritually purified world. Another portion, knowing that such a world is not possible to exist this side of heaven, is repelled by the hellish dystopian path we're forced to walk to get there. Over these differing visions, neighbor is set against neighbor, wife against husband, sister against brother. Civil war a century and a half ago saw 1 in 45 Americans perish. So deep was its wound that no successive generation found cause to resume its carnage. What was unthinkable yesterday is today quietly whispered. Defenders of this new spiritual menace declare that whites and people of color in America are two irreconcilably opposed tribes, the one stained and the other pure. The truth is otherwise. America is now two distinct species, each an amalgamation of many races, resolved unto death to live in different regimes, each toxic to the other, whispering the unthinkable. Intending to ward off the threat to the constitutional regime the founders set in place in 1790, old-line liberals and conservatives have marshaled their rhetorical weapons. We stand opposed to progressivism and the methods of cultural Marxism. We will defend family values and religious liberty. We will reject socialism. We are pro-life. We believe in free markets and lower taxes. And found them useful for gathering and building a comfortable encampment, but quite ineffective on the battlefront with the new enemy. Provisions are surely needed, but victory is unachievable without weapons appropriate to the current war being waged. What is this grave threat? The most succinct formulation, easy to understand once the larger framework within which it achieves coherence is grasped, is this: we are living amidst a new American awakening, this time without God and without forgiveness. What does this mean? Consider the First Great Awakening and its emblematic 1741 Jonathan Edwards sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Man, tainted by sin, can only be saved by Christ, the sacrificial lamb who takes away the sins of the world, John 1:29. Moral cleanliness and purity are unachievable by mortal effort alone. Everything this side of heaven is impure. Because uncleanliness cannot cleanse itself, only Christ, the divine eruption who is without spot or blemish, can atone for man's uncleanliness and save him from the eternal fires of hell to which his uncleanliness condemned him. Man deserves neither fairness nor just compensation. What he deserves is death. If you have breath in you, anything less than thankfulness for every moment you live is monstrous pride. The contemporary iteration of the sermon variants of which are preached daily across America by the new elect, might be entitled Irredeemables in the Hands of an Angry Mob. This sermon is a ghastly distortion of the version Edwards preached in 1741. Then in Puritan America, as now, man's stain is the consuming issue. In the contemporary version, moral cleanliness and purity is not purchased by the scapegoating of Christ at Calvary, but rather by scapegoating another person or human group said to be responsible for the sins of the world. Not all of mankind is unclean, declare the new elect, just the white race. All others gathered under the category of people of color are in fact clean. The one must pay, the other is to receive just compensation. Let us purge the unclean ones from our midst. And if you are white, you must convince yourself and everyone else that not you, but rather those other white people are filthy and irredeemably stained. They must pay eternally so that your white ledger, balance sheet, carries no debt. In the New American Awakening, cathartic rage is directed toward the wrong kind of white man, his group, and all that he has wrought in human history. Through the cleansing that this cathartic rage toward him achieves, America can be purified, its toxin purged from the social body. Cast one man and his group into the eternal fires of hell so that another group can be saved. If thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. The new elect are deeply offended. How do these two American awakenings differ with respect to how they understand debt and payment? In the first American awakening, God's grace and forgiveness heal man, cover over his filth, and cancel the debt owed to God that man could not pay. A divine gift alone cleansed the world and paid off man's debt, so that tomorrow might be lived with a clean ledger. The audacious wager of the current American awakening is that the gift of Christ's blood sacrifice was meaningless, indeed an embarrassment no one in good company should need to talk about. There are no gifts for which we should be thankful, no payment made on our behalf, no mercy that we must extend to others because it has been divinely extended to us. No promissory note, say, of the sort Abraham Lincoln and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. had in mind, which can be paid in full in the future if we live in faith and act in good will. Hope, faith, and charity, these are foolishness. Equity, by which we mean retribution, is the order of the day. Equity is the never-ending reminder to the irredeemables that their tomorrow can never be lived with a clean ledger. In the Church of the New American Awakening, justice involves the calculation of what one group permanently owes another, not thankfulness that man should show to God every minute of every day that he has life and breath in him, which is beyond price. We have to understand clearly where culpability lies in these two strangely related frameworks. For the Christian, the convenient lie man tells himself is that he's innocent. The very first words uttered by Adam in Genesis 3:12 reveal a creature who hides from his culpability. In the beginning, we might say, was the narcissist. Look not to me, I am innocent. Fault lies elsewhere. Do not disturb my good image of myself. Catastrophe then follows upon catastrophe. The Bible is its chronicle. God brings the law for the Jews and the gospel for Christians to rescue the heirs of Adam from the death-spiraling narcissism evident in the very first words Adam utters. The law and the gospel, however, are irrelevant in the New American Awakening, and we must understand why. Like the First Great Awakening, the point of departure for the New American Awakening is Adam's declaration, I am innocent. Instead of seeing through this ruse and attributing culpability to everyone without exception, its parishioners divide the world along racial lines into those who are innocent and those who are not. During the First Great Awakening, the systemic problem of man was not so-called systemic racism, but rather man's universal uncleanliness and culpability, for which the law and the gospel were the only antidotes, and without which all our righteous acts are like filthy rags, Isaiah 64:6. The Adam and Eve of today's Great Awakening believe otherwise. They claim that they are innocent and without spot, that they are righteous, that the poisonous serpents all around them are culpable, and that the oppressive world created by whiteness is the source of the anxiousness that assaults them like a hostile external force they cannot appease. If only whiteness can be purged, then we can get back to the Edenic, innocent world. In the Church of the New American Awakening, we do not wait for a legal system committed to a rule of law, however imperfect, to make determinations of guilt and innocence. Because you know already that guilt has only one source, namely whiteness. Every injustice has that as its cause. Legal justice is not enough, because legal justice is white justice. The New American Awakening demands a higher form of atonement than the rule of law can provide. What I want to do now is catalog the scattered array of phenomena that thoughtful citizens today witness and decry, but cannot yet fully integrate into a comprehensive framework. Critics of the New American Awakening have names for many of the ritual enactments, some in jest, some serious. What is needed is terminology that links these phenomena together so that the true nature of the threat of the New American Awakening can be clearly discerned. First, consider the purge words invoked daily to mark the shame of the irredeemables. Racist, hater, denier, fascist, Nazi, Islamophobe, transphobe, misogynist, homophobe, authoritarian, and more recently, insurrectionist. These words carry with them the power to banish and to exile. That is their intended effect. Once they have been uttered, the comportment of both the accuser and the accused visibly changes. The accuser beams with the iridescent light of discharged rage. The accused slinks back into the darkness, shamed by the leprosy of his irredeemable stain. An unbridgeable chasm has opened up between the two. They stand on opposite sides of an impenetrable border wall within a community of which they were both members a few short minutes ago. Defenders of the New American Awakening often declare that visible borders between nations should be abolished. Borders, after all, are exclusionary. Abolish borders in one place, however, and they will emerge in another. The New American Awakening establishes an invisible border between the pure and the stained. I am clean, you are filthy. This is not politics as the founders envisioned it. This is an attempt to establish a new kind of politics, a politics not of competing interests through which we build an unum, a world together, but a politics of utopian purity in which the wheat and the tares are separated before the harvest. Second, consider the phenomena of cancel culture. One day you are a citizen, the next day, having said or written something declared heretical by the Church of the New Awakening, you become, as Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America, a stranger among us. The sum total of your contributions to society, the wealth of competence that you have demonstrated, these suddenly count as nothing. In the ledger book of cancel culture, your assets cannot possibly pay off your transgressions, nor can you buy your way back into society with an apology or a promise to repent. As with original sin in Christianity, you are now burdened with a debt that is beyond measure, which you yourself can never repay. The New American Awakening rules out the gospel good news that the first American Awakening offered, namely that Christ will pay off your unpayable debt. There is no gospel good news for the cancellation of one or another persons in the New American Awakening. However far it has defected from its original purpose, the aptly named penitentiary system was an organized attempt to provide prisoners with more than just the opportunity to pay off their debts to society. Through Christian penance, their stain would be wholly removed. In the New American Awakening, those who are canceled are banished from society no less than are today's prisoners, though without any chance of removing the stain that now blots their reputation. There will always be prisoners. The new elect wish to grant clemency to one group of prisoners and permanently incarcerate another. The new elect are quick to invoke the God of love when their attention turns to prisoners and, say, illegal aliens, who in their mind are nothing but innocent victims. But they are quicker still to call down the wrath of the God of judgment on those who refuse to abide by the disingenuousness of their feigned mercy. Cancel culture is the dark interior of the New American Awakening, which claims to be guided solely by the God of love until its all-loving parishioners turn their attention to purge the irredeemables. Third, consider virtue signaling. This phenomenon is badly misnamed, and we have to stop it immediately. Virtue is of Greek origin. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is its most noble formulation. What we witness today in the New American Awakening is not feigned virtue. It is the frantic attempt to convey innocence in a world suffused with guilt in the hope that death will pass over. This phenomenon is of biblical rather than Greek philosophical origin. For the Christian, the Passover ritual is Easter, the somber Good Friday of sacrifice in which Christ's innocent blood was shed for many for the remissions of sin, Matthew 26:28, is followed on Easter Sunday by the resurrected Christ, whose victory over death is imputed to man, so that the curse of death occasioned by his sin passes him over. It's the Jewish Passover, however, that most clearly reveals the template for this innocent signaling that we now see everywhere. In the Hebrew Bible, in Exodus, God's deadly wrath passes over those Jewish homes on whose doorframes have been painted the innocent blood of the sacrificed lamb. The public visibility of that marker of innocence saves them from death. All the rest perish. This lesson about who lives and who dies, and about how death, in our case social death, can be kept at bay, is reenacted daily across America. All too many Americans, not knowing how to discharge their guilt, today reflexively commit themselves to the cause of social justice, say by painting BLM in large letters on the street in front of their house. Are they not thereby absolved of the charge of being racist? Does social death not pass over their houses because those nearby letters stand for the innocent blood of a sacrificed lamb, the death of George Floyd, for example? Across America today, citizens are transfixed on signaling their innocence. After they do so and social death passes them over, all too many return to their lives of inaction and slumber, content that they need to do nothing to address the real afflictions of real people among us. The New American Awakening has given us the frenetic moral posturing of innocent signaling that momentarily lifts the weight of guilt, but does nothing to do the long-term heavy lifting necessary to solve the real problems of real people. Fourth, consider the phenomena of wokeness. On the face of it, wokeness is indistinguishable from innocent signaling. The person who is woke is signaling his innocence. But wokeness, as the name aptly implies, pertains to awakening. From what do the woke awaken? They awaken from the slumber of unexamined prejudices that purportedly inhere in all the institutions in which they dwell. The woke must therefore transform these institutions, rename them, in fact. For the woke, for example, churches and universities are referred to as communities. If you are greeted at the door with, "Welcome to our community," you can be certain that the institution you're about to join has deliberately turned away from its proper purview. A woke church, for example, will be at pains to distance itself from the passages in the Bible that make parishioners uncomfortable, a signal word in the woke vocabulary. It will claim that the sum total of Christianity is social justice, and be at pains to explain away Christ's words, "The poor will always be with you." For the difficult and revolutionary inner reorientation of the soul towards God that Christ announced has been substituted the outer social revolution that Christ's betrayer, Judas, desired. A woke university will be at pains to distance itself from the time-honored mission of truth-seeking that will necessarily place it at odds with the prevailing prejudices of the age. Turn a university into a community, and it is transposed into an institution that reinforces the prejudices of the community. The longing for the good, the true, and the beautiful in Plato, penetrating reflections on nobility and wonder in Aristotle, the mystery of the soul and of God in Augustine, these authors and a handful of other once-in-a-thousand-year giants who invite us to explore the unknown territory beyond the borders our prejudices impose are, in the hands of the woke, purveyors of prejudice, Western prejudice, white prejudice, from which we must now awaken. The task of the woke university is to teach the Articles of Confession of the Church of the New American Awakening. Everything else is Gothic flourish, soon to be chiseled away. While not yet forced to do so, professors, administrators, and students in colleges and universities across the country are today expected to bow before the golden calf the woke university community has fashioned. Woe unto the heretic who refuses community membership. What of woke capitalism? This development has caught defenders of the free market quite off guard. When the enemy abroad was communism, and the threat within was progressivism, conservatives and defenders of the free market made common cause. Together they endorsed a constitutional republic whose vibrancy was assured by family, by religious liberty, and by entrepreneurship. The free market entrepreneur, as we know, must attend to the ledger book that records profit and loss. There are many important things he must attend to, but if for long he fails to attend to that ledger book, his business fails. The Church of the New American Awakening presents the entrepreneur with another ledger book, one that registers guilt and innocence, and demands that he succeed by its measure or suffer social death. In order to be profitable now in this double sense, money must be made and innocence must be signaled. Under the banner of corporate social responsibility, woke capitalism today funnels vast sums of money to so-called social justice causes that purchase corporate innocence, Black Lives Matter, climate change causes, etc. To be a legitimate business enterprise in America today, earning a profit is not enough. You must prove in your advertising, your hiring and advancement practices, and in your philanthropic portfolio that you are not a racist, you are not a denier, etc. To these observations should be added another. The largest and most profitable business enterprises on the planet, the ones crony capitalism makes possible, have discovered that in order to avoid scrutiny to which they would otherwise be subject, they need only signal innocence in the ledger book the New American Awakening provides. Should we then really be surprised, for example, that BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm, which oversees $7 trillion in assets, is a leading advocate of corporate social responsibility? In what sort of world is it acceptable for a business enterprise to have that much power? The basic tenets of market commerce disallow it. Answer: in the woke capitalist world in which innocent signaling in one domain buys you an exemption from scrutiny in another, parishioners in the Church of the New American Awakening can become fabulously wealthy and even actively seek to destroy their competition, provided they find cover from social death while they do so. That is why the Democratic Party, the party of innocent signaling, has become the party of the super rich. It says to them, "Come unto me, all of you who are heavily burdened with wealth, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28, slightly modified. I suspect we will soon see the Republican Party, for the last half century the party of big business, abandon woke capitalism and turn its attention to the urgent task of defending the American worker instead. If I had time, I would spend 5 minutes or so talking about Trump derangement syndrome, which I take to be a very serious part of this, and I know that many of you have serious reservations about Trump, but there's something more going on with Trump derangement syndrome than meets the eye. And I'm simply going to say in the most succinct way that what is most striking about Trump derangement syndrome is the rapid oscillation back and forth between cathartic rage and reasonable conversation. And the larger argument, which I won't read to you here, is that what Christianity did in providing the one sufficient scapegoat was to put an end to sacrificial offering, such that there could be what I call in this little essay, the clearing of reason. But when you walk that back, when we move away from the one sufficient sacrifice, we have to return to sacrifice. And so what you see in the walking away from this Christian understanding of the one sufficient sacrifice is the return to the pagan understanding that sacrifice has to happen all the time, which is why, whether it's Trump or not, in the New American Awakening, you have to have constant scapegoats. And so we will oscillate back and forth between the clearing of reason and the dark forest of cathartic rage that is always impinging, which makes it very difficult for us to have reasonable conversations or to build a common world together. Sixth, we must give account of the fixation of the Church of the New American Awakening on dirty fossil fuels that produce carbon dioxide and clean green energy that supposedly does not. Scientifically speaking, carbon dioxide is neither clean nor dirty. It is a molecule containing one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms, whose combined molecular weight is just above 44. Life on planet Earth is almost entirely carbon-based, which means that carbon dioxide is an integral part of the carbon cycle on planet Earth. Without this cycling exchange of carbon, life would quickly perish. The human body is 18% carbon. By weight, carbon dioxide is 0.4% of the atmosphere. We breathe in, and then we exhale 110 times that amount, 4.4% in every breath. We do so because our bodies dispose of some of the carbon-based foods we eat by off-gassing carbon dioxide through exhalation, not terribly different than what a coal-fired power plant does through combustion. In the New American Awakening, carbon dioxide is the molecular embodiment of original sin. If it could be done away with, parishioners declare, the environment would be pure and there would be no more anthropogenic caused death. To become pure, to be absolved of the charge of environmental homicide, we must reduce our carbon footprint. In the First Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards argued, the wages of sin are death, Romans 6:23. In the New American Awakening, the wages of carbon dioxide are death. As Christ paid a ransom to redeem man from sin in the First Great Awakening, the cost of clean green energy is the ransom we must now pay to be cleansed of sin. Is this science or is this something else? No sensible American would disagree that we must be good stewards of our planetary home. Proper stewardship begins, however, with the understanding that purity is unachievable in a broken world. If we do not procure energy from drilling for fossil fuels, we will get it from mining rare earth minerals imported largely from China for solar panels and wind turbines. Pollution, we must attend to the theological overtone of that word, is unavoidable because all of life is a burden on nature, a taking and a disturbing, which we cannot circumvent except by never having existed in the first place. There is no imposition-free life. Having been cast out of Eden, in the sweat of our brow we now labor, Genesis 3:19, among nature's thorns. That is our lot after the fall. We cannot go back. We can only walk our path recognizing our own culpability and regularly wondering whether what we take from nature is to nourish us as pilgrims seeking daily bread or as tyrants seeking dominion. In the Church of the New American Awakening, the stain of carbon dioxide and the dirty fossil fuels that produce it block our return path to Eden. Going green supposes that filth, perhaps ultimately the filth that is man himself, can be purged so that the path back can be unblocked. Like the other phenomena we have considered here, this one locates fault in some other place besides in man's own darkened heart. Carbon dioxide molecules, hundreds of billions of them, are the real culprit. Let us weave together a new economy with new technology so that like the fig leaves woven together by Adam and Eve, our guilt can be covered over and we can feign innocence. So intimate the new elect. Seventh, we should concern ourselves with the deeper meaning of toxic masculinity. For what is masculinity a proxy in the New American Awakening? And what will be accomplished by purging it from the social body? During the First Great Awakening, God the Father, the God of judgment, indicted man for his disobedience and sentenced him to death, Genesis 2:17. Through the mercy of God the Son, man's sentence was commuted. This sequence, justice, judgment followed by mercy, infraction followed by forgiveness, is inscribed into creation and cannot be tampered with without producing never-ending confusion. The New American Awakening intends to eradicate this sequence. It intends to purge the God of judgment so as to produce a fatherless world, a world of mercy without judgment. Whether in the way parents raise their kids or in the way citizens think about our national borders, parishioners in the new Church of the American Awakening declare that mercy must now altogether supplant judgment. Whatever their children declare, that they will allow to be or to have, without judgment or constraint. If illegal aliens want to cross our borders, they are invited in without judgment. They are dreamers, not illegal aliens. Therein lies mercy. Can mercy exist without judgment? Here is a fateful question for our age. How we answer it will determine whether, with sober confidence, we will declare, "Thou shalt not," in every arena of life, or whether we shall abolish borders altogether. In the First Great Awakening, the answer was clear. Judgment, thou shalt not, comes before mercy. Without God's judgment against man, the merciful gospel good news through Christ there was a way back to the Father. That would have been meaningless and incoherent. No judgment, no mercy. There is no Easter Sunday without Good Friday. Mercy is a supplement to justice, not a substitute for it. In the Church of the New American Awakening, however, mercy is a substitute. This audacious claim cannot endure any evidence to the contrary. That is why masculine judgment is utterly toxic to its enterprise and must be purged. Not a trace can remain. No more grim decisions about life and death. No more winners and losers. No more wars. No more consequences for our action. No more humiliating insults that can toughen our resolve. No more necessary pains to be courageously endured in silence, except perhaps the humiliation of being masculine today. Instead, we must endure the never-ending faux mercy that prepares the new elect to be at once pathetically tender and tyrannically self-absorbed. When we purge judgment, we do not get unalloyed mercy. We get a fatherless world, a world without boundaries, in which mercy can never make an appearance. Eighth and finally, we must give an account of this fixation in the New American Awakening on microaggressions and unconscious bias. Within what framework is the idea that we are guilty without even knowing it make sense? The new elect currently declare that racism is as deep as we need to go to answer that question. To be white is to be racist. Not to admit it is to confirm that you are a racist. Let us dredge up recent memories that have been covered over by the silt of racialism these past several years, and recall that during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings in the summer of 2018, every man in America went to sleep at night wondering if he was indeed a misogynist, a rapist in secret, who needed to come clean and admit his guilt. Brett Kavanaugh was not one man, he was every man. That drama pertained to sex, but the courtroom verdict was the same. Though you profess you are innocent, you are guilty. You are, after all, a man, and to be a man is to be a rapist, despite the fig leaves of decency that apparently cover over your sin. Misogyny, though, was then. Racism is now. Soon, now, no doubt, we will find other guilty victims of microaggression, another category of innocent victims. One wave after another that crashes at your feet as you, a law-abiding citizen, walk along the beach and feel your standing undermined. The sum total of your experience, along with all of human history, overwhelmed and reconfigured by wave after wave, ad infinitum, for each moment, each for a moment, the focus of our attention, only to be forgotten when the next wave comes in and undermines the sand you thought was firmly underneath your feet. Do you not now see it off in the distance? The next wave that will crash on the shore and shift our attention from mere misogynists and mere racists? When it does, the new elect will demand that the previous innocent sexual and racial victims of microaggression and unconscious bias confess their full support for the next wave of innocent victims, even if it undermines their own footing. You are an African American who labored on behalf of civil rights in the 1960s, who today defends the generative family in the conventional church, as did Martin Luther King Jr. Alas, we, the elect, have reached the transgender moment. The Church of the New American Awakening must now indict you for microaggressions and unconscious bias because you actually believe that sex is an actual category established by God rather than an oppressive contrivance to be repudiated. The families and churches you naively assert you need are guilty of thought crimes. Renounce them now. This is not a request, it is a command. Innocent victim one day, transgressor the next. That is the fate of every parishioner in the Church of the New American Awakening. When fault lies outside of you, sooner or later, someone will declare that you are the source of fault they refuse to acknowledge has its own source within them. Can the impenetrable darkness in the human heart that microaggressions and unconscious bias purport to disclose be revealed by the erosive action of wave after overwhelming wave? Sex yesterday, race today, tomorrow transgenderism. This is the grim pseudo-moral project now underway in the Church of the New American Awakening. Had talk of microaggressions and unconscious bias emerged during the first American awakening, it would have been dismissed as pathetic and superficial. Sin, Christians of an earlier age would have said, is original. Sin already resides in you before you are a man or woman, this race or that. Hide though you may behind your purported innocence that membership in this or that identity group buys you, your problem cannot be traced to either being a man, a woman, black, or white. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. 1 John 1:8. The Church of the New Awakening deceives itself. We must fight against microaggressions and unconscious bias, its parishioners declare. The Christian, who is Adam's heir, laughs at this pompous moralism that wades into waist-deep water where man can stand without assistance and bob up and down on waves that then undermine the footing of those who walk along the shore. There are far deeper waters than these proud parishioners know, which produce drowning waves and turbulent seas that wash over man and compel him to cry out for rescue, divine rescue. Where are the Christians today who know this, who dare say without embarrassment that sin is a problem so grave and mortally irresolvable that God the Son had to come to rescue man from its drowning waves? Alas, most Christians long ago waded up on the sandy beach and encamped there. They grew tired of swimming, tired of the never-ending dependence on God's rescue. They are Adam's heirs who still feel guilt, but they have forgotten sin's depth. About those waves that crash on the beach, they should say, "You are a faint afterwards of titanic storms farther out to sea." Our problem is not microaggressions and unconscious bias toward this or that category of person, as you naively imagine. Our problem is sin, which corrupts our understanding of ourselves, of all others, and of God, and which cries out for divine rescue. Good Friday and Easter Sunday encapsulate the whole drama of man's brokenness and of his redemption, the depth and glory of which you have only the slightest understanding. Alas, Christians today, walking along the sandy beach, safe from the distant turbulent seas, do not say that. Easter for them is another feast day, nothing more than the spring bookend to the fall feast day of Thanksgiving. They have forgotten how to say what they once knew by heart, forgotten that the first clause of the third paragraph of the Nicene Creed, "for us and for our salvation," hands them as a gift the only answer that tomorrow can end the charade of the Church of the New American Awakening, a church that elicits Christian guilt not for the purpose of directing man's heart to the divine rescue he so desperately needs, but for the purpose of extinguishing the American regime altogether. I have tried in the compass of these brief remarks to bring together a host of phenomena that many of us now intimate are related, but do not yet grasp are pieces of a larger, comprehensive project. Purge words, cancel culture, innocent signaling, wokeness, Trump derangement syndrome, the fixation on clean energy, along with microaggressions and unconscious bias. What gathers all these together into a coherent whole is the Church of the New American Awakening that now commands our national attention. Its liturgy involves the anxious attempt to secure purity in an impure world by scapegoating someone or something out there so its parishioners can declare themselves to be clean and without spot. A Christian who believes that sin is original, that only Christ is without spot or blemish, can see in the host of this phenomena of the New American Awakening a shallow apparition of Christianity itself. They have the antidote to the poison. Most Americans today, however, are nominal Christians who feel Christian guilt without understanding its depth. For them, original sin and Christ's sacrificial offering are an embarrassment. They do not have the antidote to the poison. They have only the poison. Some are devout parishioners of the Church of the New American Awakening who scapegoat in order to purge that poison. Others, stricken by the poison, know the cost of the never-ending scapegoating. They know that that cost is the destruction of the American regime itself, and so resist. But with what weapons can they resist? The rhetorical weapons that brought victory during the Cold War are of little use in this battle. We're not fighting Marxism or progressivism here. We are fighting over the meaning of sin and redemption. The fate of the American regime now hangs on the question of whether we can recover the Christian understanding of sin and redemption, or whether, as the Church of the New American Awakening would have it, the redemption of American regime can only be achieved by the destruction of the American regime. While this question is being worked out in the soul of America, every major action item in the Democratic Party, without exception, intends redemption rather than destruction. Democratic Party pushback against national borders, its unwavering insistence that fundamental political and economic transformations are necessary to address climate change, its disgust with dirty fossil fuels, its demand for wealth redistribution, its dubiety about equal treatment under the law, and its resolve that every mediating institution in which citizens gather must now be altered so as to become inclusive. All of these have their root in the supposition that the nation-state, market commerce, petrochemicals that fuel it, and the conventional generative family, our civic institutions and our religious institutions, are unclean and must be purged. This is not politics. This is a religious quest to establish a sacrificial offering who can take away the sins of the world. Thank you.